How many times have you been told to go get a second opinion? I don't know if you're like me, it might be 10, 20. I don't know how many times. Anytime there's a problem in the healthcare system, everybody says, hey, I need a second opinion. Well, but no one tells you how to do it or what to look for. It's amazingly complex. And most of us just resort to calling up our friend and our neighbor or somebody in the family who's connected to a doctor some way remotely and gets a recommendation on, who had a good surgical outcome and what their experience was. So that's not a very good way of finding a doctor, to be quite honest with you. So let me give you some structure and bring some process to this. And one of the things you need to realize is that it's not a problem to go get a second opinion. Now, let me just start right there with the whole notion of getting a second opinion, because so many of us are scared to go do it, and we're scared to alienate the primary doctor, not primary care, but the primary doctor whose opinion we're confirming. In other words, you're going out getting a second opinion, and there's this thought that somehow I'm going to alienate that guy and he just won't take care of me. Very rare. Let me just reassure you, that's very rare that occurs, that the doctor, the first doctor you go to is going to be offended that you go get a second opinion. If they are offended, they're a little bit dangerous as a doctor, in my humble opinion. Those kinds of doctors are more interested in being right themselves, and they're more interested in defending their opinion than they are actually in your own care. So I would be careful when I see that red flag of somebody who's offended that you went and got a second and third opinion. There's just so much information out there in terms of the medical knowledge base, and it's, as I said in one of the short videos I had, the entire scope of medical knowledge is changing so rapidly. Right now, there's a doubling of the knowledge base of medical information in 3.5 years. Now, that means that a guy who went to become a doctor 30 years ago is operating off of a baseline of what was known about medical care 30 years ago. That doesn't make him a bad doctor. As a matter of fact, he has a ton more experience than the guy who just came out. However, they may not be aware of the newest state-of-the-art procedures. So it really does pay to go get a second opinion. And after all, it's your life, it's your quality of life that we're talking about here. So you're going to want to decide to go get a second opinion, number one. Number two, you're going to want to do the homework, and there's a bunch of websites on how to do it. And number three, as you start to go through this process and you're sorting around on second opinions, don't be afraid to go outside, a little bit outside of the scope of the specialty problem you're trying to solve. In other words, if you have a brain tumor problem, don't be afraid to get an integrative medicine doctor to take a look at what happens with all of the side effects of somebody who got brain surgery. Because the brain surgeon's job is really just the brain surgery. It's a technician, really. And so, outside of the scope of that, could be vertigo, could be, you could lose your hearing. There could be a whole range of side effects that occur that you're going to have to go figure out how to deal with. And so you're not only getting a second opinion about what you're going into and confirming the correct diagnosis and confirming the correct treatment plan, but the scope of that treatment plan has got to include all of the side effects that are in many cases inevitable. So you need different disciplines, doctors from different disciplines looking at the same problem, is my point. There's another component of this that is subjective, and I'm not going to go through every piece of this, the second opinion profiling system, but there is a subjective component about feeling comfortable and confident with your doctor. So there are some doctors you just feel very comfortable with, and there's some you don't. Now, it's not necessarily true that you have to like your doctor, especially a surgeon who's going to go in and do something. You don't necessarily have to like the person. That's not a good criteria for making a selection. You do need to know what his credentials are. You do need to know, and some of his credentials are experience, for example, like how many of these surgical procedures do you do? How many times do you see this? How often do you work on this? And are you connected with a center of excellence? So you're going to want to answer all of those questions. Then there's the whole financial piece of it. And some of us have networks to deal with. And the network is that list of doctors who work with your insurance carrier and give you a much lower out-of-pocket cost. So you're going to want to go to your insurance carrier's website and confirm whether these doctors are in network or out of network. If it turns out that you have to have an out-of-network doctor and it's really, really critical, then think about getting that done. And there's ways to work with those doctors when and if you ask them to work with you. But you've got to be engaged enough in the process to ask these questions. Many doctors are connected to hospital systems, or you may be in a hospital system right now. And one of the things you're going to want to do is check the hospital safety scores. And the reason I bring that up is it's a statistic that seems to be widely unknown except for people in the hospital industry. And they seem to accept the fact, no one likes it, but there's a fact out there that we all have to deal with, and that is that medical errors are the third leading cause of death in the United States. And it's an ugly fact that we all have to deal with. Everyone's doing the best they can, but most of these deaths have to do with infections that occur in a hospital. In other words, you're going into a hospital and you're getting an infection as a result of going there. You didn't have it before you got there. Now you went there and you've got it. So that's a huge problem. Well, there's a hospital safety score website that you can go check. And it would be really good if you have the freedom to check it out and the time to check it out to know what your hospital safety scores are. The last thing I will leave you with is that the second opinion and the doctor management process is really what's going to consume most of your healthcare time. In other words, managing doctors, whether or not you have the right doctor, and all the ancillary doctors that come along is really a work in progress. It is never perfect. It's constantly changing. And this is a beginning point. At least it gives you a process and a methodology for searching out the best second opinion you can possibly get. I want to talk to you about the concept of building a medical team. And what am I talking about? Well, whenever we have a complex medical situation in front of us, we generally have multiple doctors that are working on our care, and they're not necessarily coordinated. In my case, which was a colon cancer circumstance, I had the gastroenterologist. He was the guy who found the cancer. He referred me to a hematologist oncologist, so I had my oncologist. And then they put me on radiation while I was going through all the chemo, and so I had a radiologist. And then I had a nutritionist, and then I had a pharmacist, and then I had a primary care doctor. And none of these people coordinated with anybody. Now, hopefully your situation isn't that fragmented, but it's not uncommon for it to be. So one of the first things you need to do is to document for yourself, for your own sanity, and for your own effectiveness, as well as for your caregivers. So if there's multiple caregivers, they can pass off this information to one another and pick up where the other one left off. Who is it that is the quarterback on your team? So who's calling the plays? And that typically boils down to where you're getting the bulk of your care. and that shifts. So you may have an oncologist who's really the quarterback for a period of time. Then you may have a surgeon who's a quarterback for a period of time. And then you may go into kind of a dormant stage, and your primary care physician may be working with your pharmacist. And so there's all of these moving parts, and you need a way at least to begin to start to track who's coordinating with who, where your medical records are. And so the medical team builder and care coordination flow chart is the best place to get started to do that. So go ahead and start working this whole thing out, and you'll find that you feel a whole lot better about that. You'll just feel much more mentally organized, and that is a relief in and of itself. One of the most elusive things in any long-term healthcare situation that you're facing is the feeling of well-being or the feeling of peace of mind, especially a peace of mind that's independent of the circumstance you're in. Obviously, there's going to be situations, and we're going to reach a point at some point in our life when there's an irreversible problem. There's a problem that just can't be solved. So how is it that you achieve peace of mind in that circumstance about the medical situation? So it would be good and important to know, as a matter of fact, it's critical to know that you're in the right place for your care to begin with. It's also really important to have the confidence that you have the right diagnosis to begin with. You know, I said earlier on that there's a 33%, some as high as 40% error rates in diagnoses to begin with. So, it's hard to achieve a level of peace of mind until you're confident that you actually have that diagnosis dialed down and you have it correct. And then there's all sorts of elements of your care that are really important so that it doesn't become demeaning. In other words, when they go to battle and they go to war with disease, our bodies are the battlefields of the war, and there's lots of collateral damage. And one of the most demeaning pieces of the healthcare experience can be a doctor or a team of doctors who take no responsibility for, nor do they even recognize the collateral damage that's being incurred by you and me as patients and or caregivers. In other words, there's no recognition that there's any kind of side effects going on at all, or they had anything to do with it. No one's really looking to place blame, but they are really, I think it's important to have some level of confidence that you understand and they understand how difficult the situation is that you're in and their role in it. So there's another piece of the puzzle is do you have any kind of a methodology for living above a circumstance? Now we're kind of getting into a spiritual realm here, but how is it that you live above that circumstance so that all of the negative emotion isn't just sucking you down and making you physically worse, emotionally worse, spiritually defeated, and you need a methodology and a way to live above the circumstance and detach from the negative. And the most resilient people in the world really become very grateful. And we talked about that before, and I'll bring it up over and over again, but it's the method. It's a natural method of detaching from all the negative and focusing on the positive. So go ahead and work through the peace of mind matrix, and I think it will really help you decide what's missing if you don't have a peace of mind and how to get there. It's really important.